it's Lou welcoming you to our new series of conversations from Freelance Foundation. Some of you may remember that back in 2022, Larry Achampong and I came together to launch Visualise, the Runnymede Trust and Freelance Foundation report on race and inclusion in secondary school art education. The report examines the current state of race in visual art education at Key Stage 4 in England, confirming what educators have been saying for years, that art education is at a crisis point. Despite their best efforts, teachers and students are rooted in an education system that's failing to nurture diverse art practices. Following the report's publication, I've regrouped with Freelance for this new weekly 5-part series of conversations with art educators, practitioners and makers to dig deeper into the ideas presented by the report and to offer you, our listeners who work in education, a toolkit, if you like, of conversations that we hope will support you in exploring the ideas around providing a more diverse art curriculum for your students. I've included a link to the report and to our guests' work in the show notes that accompany this episode. I hope you enjoy this series of conversations. Hey, it's Lou here, welcoming you to episode 4 of our series of conversations with Freelance Foundation. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Shepherd Manyinka. Shepherd is an artist and educator based in London, focusing on memory, space and ideas of future and present and restoration through play, sound, workshops and collage. Shepherd graduated from Central St Martin's with a BA in Fine Art and an MA in Academic Practice in Art, Design and Communications, and has since gone on to work and exhibit with the likes of Spike Island, Innova, Camden Art Centre and Tate. Shepherd is kindly joining me today to discuss teaching as an artistic practice. I can't wait to share it with you, so let's dive in. We're here to talk about your work as a teacher, as a lecturer, as a tutor, and your art practice and how one informs the other. But before we start, for anybody who's listening who has yet to have the pleasure to know your work or to come across your work, can you just share a little bit about your practice and the work that you do as a teacher?
Yeah, my practice, I guess I'll describe it as a multidisciplinary practice. I think I've never been able to kind of go, I have one kind of like specific kind of medium to focus and work with. It's generally like an experimental practice, but I guess like the crux of it is video, sound, and performance lately. But I'm also like really interested in working with people in a collaborative sense. And the workshop, for instance, tends to be one of those spaces where you're working with a group of people on a particular thing. And I'm really interested in those conversations that happens through making and finding different ways of like making. I might have my kind of like methodology, and you get someone who's, I don't know, 10 responding to something in their own way, and then you might get someone who's a little bit older, a teenager, or I think everyone has their own different ways of like responding to material. So that's kind of like where my practice is at the moment. And then on the side of that, I also do music, so it's kind of it's a layered practice, which I think sometimes when I try to describe my practice to people and they're like, well, what do you do? Can't really pinpoint it in a way, which I'm all right with that, I think.
We're here to kind of talk a little bit about the practicalities like involved in diversifying the art curriculum. One issue at the moment is that 6 in 10 teachers feel kind of unsure of the language to use. Like, we're obviously talking about white teachers because 94% of art teachers are white. So when teaching the work of minority ethnic artists, But 90% of the teachers who responded to this report said that they would find supplementary teaching resources beneficial to their teaching. So it's kind of like the interest is there, but perhaps they need some confidence building because they have not met the work of global majority artists in the way that perhaps we have. So there's a bit of an issue there. And I just wonder if you've seen these sort of challenges play out from your kind of view.
In some ways, I guess I kind of try to bring it back to myself and how I think about teaching or think about my process of coming to learn through art and what was taught to me, and then what I later found out about, I guess, the art world and the arts, and being maybe canyonized in some ways, and how a different voice was required. And in a way, I might be jumping ahead here, but try to find, I guess, a process of learning that's more inclusive, or that's not even just inclusive, because I think inclusive in a way sometimes means that you're asking for permission, but in a way of going, these are the things I am interested in as an artist, or more specifically a black artist. And if I'm in the classroom, how can I then take those things that I've learned through my practice and apply them to the classroom as part of the learning, in a real way? So that's kind of I think the most useful thing to do, to kind of open up that conversation about art making, or art processes, which is really broad, isn't it? There's so much there, but just opening it up and finding methods from all these different practitioners that can be useful for someone who might be from Asia or for someone who might be from Poland, but it just happens that the reference is a black artist.
I home educate, but I sit in on my daughter's GCSE art lessons, right? And I'm quite involved in those. And I definitely see that some of the teachers, I don't know if they have the confidence of moving outside of their remit of what they know. So I had to heavily supplement the curriculum that she was working for at GCSE level. And I'm thinking really what can be useful if teachers don't have the confidence or the knowledge is really, like you say, is be open to the students as well. What is coming from the students, see what students you have, and kind of respond to their needs, what they're bringing to the classroom as well. And so I think you're right. It's that open dialogue between the students and the guide, whoever's guiding them through the curriculum, to just try and have that open dialogue.
It's not a master teacher thing, which the students then take on. You have all the knowledge, and then that becomes their way of navigating the world. But it's they're coming to you with a particular interest, and then within conversation, you kind of figure out, okay, oh, you're interested in this, or have you thought about this kind of way of thinking about your practice, or where are you coming from? What's already existing in that space that could be useful for a practice within this artistic space, which doesn't mean that you're, I don't know if it's perpetuating is the right word. It's there's the art world, and then you teach the kind of the Western way of thinking about art, and then that becomes the way everyone learns how to make art. And then someone else who's not from that space, they have their own, I guess, cultural capital, and that's important. Coming with that and then seeing the value in that. And I think that's what I try to do, see the value in your own your story. That then can be the drive into making, and not forgetting that, because I think that's really valuable. And I think sometimes maybe the art schools that we went to, in some ways, not all, but in some ways, kind of quashed that, discouraged that, or if it was encouraged, it's encouraged in an almost kind of exoticizing way, which I think not everyone wants to be speaking with this, or I am this kind of thing, but there's elements of the I am this that are useful in making.
Do you find that institutions like museums and galleries, for example, and the secondary and tertiary education spaces, do you think there's a good relationship between the two? You know, like you'll find that schools are very open to engaging what's going on at museums and galleries and their education offerings, and vice versa. Like, how have you seen like it develop over the years?
I realized at some point that it was all about numbers,
Right. What do you
right?
mean?
So, what do I
Tell
mean?
me what you mean.
Ah,
That's really interesting.
muddy waters,
Yeah.
muddy waters. I think that this is. Do they understand each other? I think they understand that they're providing something for each other. That maybe that's the best way to answer that question. So whether the service that's been provided is good or bad or good or not.
Does it work? Yeah, does
Um,
it work, those
yeah,
shepherds?
does it? Yeah, exactly. Does it work or is it working? Or yeah, and I guess it's also dependent on which institution is doing the work, because some institutions are amazing, and I've worked with some really amazing spaces, and you're like, okay, they get it.
Which ones? Which ones are doing it right?
Well, I spent quite a bit of time at Camden Art Centre. That was really, really cool. God, I'm naming people here. But you know, we have to, the good ones. Camden's done it well, and then there's like a follow through thing where like you had students or young people coming in to participate in a weekly kind of like workshop thing, and then they're encouraged to kind of apply to university, or they're invited to do a residency. You know, so there's this follow through, and then have come back and actually led some of those like activities in the gallery, and I think that's just a good follow through kind of like program. Also, like the galleries, I mean, SLG did that quite well, where they're in the community. Same with Camden. God, I feel like I'm going to leave people out here. Um, but I think those were the things that showed me that, okay, oh, this is what can happen. Like with the institution, because I think what happens sometimes is people come to your space and they do something and then they go away and that's it. Whereas, like, if they do come to your space, what else are you providing them? Beyond the experience of being in the space for, I don't know, for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be. So I think it's, in a sense, it's almost like those spaces need to supplement those participants once they've left. Like give them something to take away and carry on with, and not necessarily just be the people that came to do the thing, or the, like I was saying earlier, like working outside of this kind of like this educational space into the spaces where these people are coming from, also encourages them to rethink maybe like the perceptions of what art can be. It would be interesting if, I guess, like, yeah, I don't know, if you had a group of teachers and a group of, like, I don't know, someone from the institution designing a thing in order to provide it for the school. So I guess like a good example with that is what I just recently did with Cementfield, where I worked with a teacher from a school in Sittingbourne, Hannah, and I with for Cementfield, and the idea was to basically build a learning resource to support students and teachers and artists, um, to work through what's it like going to, I guess, I don't know, a gallery looking at a piece of artwork. So you had a series of like prompts that allowed you to go into a space and look at something and then think about what you're looking at. And then some of the prompts are just as simple as going, oh, go for a walk, sit down for 10 minutes. So then that way kind of allows you to get away from this, I guess, like a traditional way about thinking about art making, or assisting people through your stuckness. If you're really stuck, what do you do? Like if you're really stuck through, like you're working on a painting and you can't think of what's the next step. So like one of the prompts would be just like, yeah, jump for like 2 minutes, just jump. So you got this series of cards which are prompts to help you navigate an art practices, and also allows parents to use those as a tool to understand maybe how the young people are thinking about, or their children are thinking about the art world, or bridge that gap.
I think that's really interesting. And I think that's kind of a vital thing that sometimes can be overlooked. I think, certainly working with really young children myself, and especially like children with special needs, like all across the board, I can see sometimes what happens when they will see them as grand spaces, an art gallery or anything like that. And they will be given their little cards with the boxes on to kind of write their answers or tick as they go through the gallery or whatever. And I know that a lot of students find that particularly difficult to do without there being some kind of grounding kind of work that's done to start with. Like you say, like just recognize like the fact that A, they're children and B, they're in these big spaces that perhaps some of them aren't used to. So let's acknowledge that first. And then secondly, I'm very aware that some of the children will feel like they have to be good and they have to give a right answer and all of these things. So I think a lot of the work that can be done is about belonging. How do you, first of all, make like the children feel like they are safe, like they are welcome, like they belong in these spaces? And I don't think that that can be like an instantaneous thing to expect from those relationships that are going between education and the gallery spaces. And then we're thinking about continuity as well. I think your point to continuity and consistency is really important. It's like not just go once and provide like a workshop for the school group or something like that. Let it be a back and forth and let there be a continuity there, because that's how the relationships build and that's how the sense of belonging builds. And I just think only really good kind of teaching and interaction can start from that place, especially with younger children.
Yeah. I think for me, like, I was doing some stuff with, I was doing stuff with workshops with Innova,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah.
in Tottenham, and like I've spent a lot. It's interesting because my work, whenever I do these kind of, I guess, like community projects, I always end up in Tottenham or somewhere somewhere north of the river. I live south of the river. Everything happens over there. I end up doing stuff there, whichever how small, like through air. And I'm in Islington on an estate. I'm just like, okay, I'm here. We're doing this thing. We're making a sound piece. But like going back to the workshops, it was a school just not far from our Seven Sisters station. Um, and they were like really young kids. I think it was four, year six. I was working with, and it was like we're gonna make sculpture today. We're gonna work with plaster, and then next week we're gonna do, I don't know, think about drawing portraits and clay and all of these different mediums. Which like we're doing this on a Saturday. Kids were kind of selected from different classes to come and Ellesmead Primary School. That's it, Ellesmead Primary School. Come in and participate in these workshops. And because they were coming from a mixed cohort, like different year groups, all of a sudden you had like these older kids being mentored by the younger kids, or vice versa, and then someone knows how to really mix your water and plaster of Paris to kind of like get a good solid shape. Like, how do you make a mold and all these other stuff? So, like, I'm learning through watching these kids, and they're teaching each other, and they're teaching me. But then also, what would happen was that within that space, you might have some kids who were not paying attention in, I don't know, maths or something like that. And this framework of just coming in to do loads of different kind of experimental things um, allows them to start to rethink about a way of learning all these other subjects. And I think we did it for 2 years, or maybe, yeah, because we were kind of like coming out of lockdown, I think, or just before and then after. Um, you find that the kids that were kind of slightly behind before, or they were probably might have been the ones that were not really paying attention in class, came back as leaders in the space, like really as mentors for these younger the new cohort, which I thought was a really nice way of encouraging the idea of like creativity in these spaces, and also helping these young people or anyone find a new way of like learning, because not everyone is academically like focused, right? I mean, there's difference. Yeah, maybe it's just a difference in academia, right? Where some things are about hands, it's about how we see things, and some people are all about text, they're all about writing, they're all about maths and all these other things. And I think once we understand that through these conversations, I guess like in the learning spaces, the better we can support people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And you touched on something that really we're here to talk about today. And I'd like to end with hearing about your teaching practice and how your teaching informs your own practice, your art practice.
I've always, well, I say always, this might change in the future. Um, I feel like the two things kind of run alongside each other, you know, or they kind of weave into each other. Teaching practice, I guess that's what it is. It's like a teaching practice, because I think it's like that thing of like the workshop, giving someone an exercise and then they figure out a way of doing it quicker than I would. You know, where it's like I'm really into like process. I might take forever doing something, and then someone says, oh, you know what, this is actually really an hour job. It doesn't need to take the whole day. But because I'm just enjoying this kind of lengthy process. So I think the teaching aspect of that is almost probably like maybe an unlearning of the things that I know, you know, acquiring new knowledge through conversations with students about their own practices, and then me of also giving them something to kind of take away with. And also because like I learned how to make art through watching other artists make, if that makes sense. So like my uncle was an artist, my other uncle was a carpenter. You know, so you had these two individuals they were always doing something, which I was like, what are you doing? Oh, he's making this thing which he's going to put ink on, and then he puts this ink onto this thing, and then the ink transfers onto a piece of fabric, and then you find out that's like screen printing. So he was building his own screens, you know, at home, you know, or building a studio out of just various kind of like woods and whatever. And then I end up building up my own studio. And then these are things that I've learned from watching other people do. So I think, in a way, I guess like the link between the two is that my practice should exist within the classroom in a I guess just it's somewhat open way, which means that students can go, oh yeah, you did that. How do you do that kind of thing? You know, and I should be able to answer that question instead of be cagey about my processes, because then that allows them to learn and find their own way of maybe realizing some of the things that they are thinking of doing. Because I think it's easy for us as artists to just be we're up there on is it pedestal, right? We're up there and everyone else is down here. And how do you make this thing up here attainable when you're nowhere near it? Everything is about looking up and trying to understand what's up there and never really getting there. It's like I think access is important, basically. So, but that's not for everyone. That's not for everyone. But I think that's important that art practices become a bit more accessible, and then the spaces that art is presented in become accessible, and then anyone can just kind of go in and do whatever they want to do, look at art and find themselves in those spaces, right? Because they'll feel comfortable in those spaces.
Well, that's absolutely it. That's about belonging, isn't it? And that's what all of this is about. And that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for being so generous, talking with us about your practice. It was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you, Shepherd. Hey, it's is Lou, just popping back to say thank you for listening to this conversation made in collaboration with Freelands Foundation. Find out more by following the links in the podcast show notes and subscribe to Shade Podcast to catch all the episodes in this series, where we'll be taking a deep dive into the art curriculum and how we can support each other in affecting change. This series was produced and hosted by me, Lou Mensah. It was mixed by Tess Davidson, and the original music was composed for Shade Podcast by Brian Jackson. I'll see you next time.